15 horas, acho que vamos dar mais uns 2, 3 minutinhos só para.
Just give it about 2 or 3 more minutes to make sure anyone else is entering, and then we'll begin.
Daniel pediu para falar.
Oi, Sérgio.
Daniel raised hand. Podemos começar?
Podemos começar, deixa eu só ver aqui.
Begin?
Eu vou pedir para o pessoal que quiser se manifestar, depois fazer perguntas.
So if anyone has questions, please use the Q&A resource and the chat, and we will invite and monitor each of you of your contributions. All right, so I think we can begin because it's already past 3. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our earnings release for the third quarter of 2020. We will have a quick presentation talking about the numbers in the quarter, and we have the participation of all of our executive team, Henrique Zegman for the paper, forestry, and waste business, and Lindomar for packaging. Fabiano is responsible for people and management, and Ojivan is our CFO. So
we're starting our presentation of third quarter of 2020, and we'll have some simultaneous translation. You just have to press the button on the top of the page, the bottom of the page. And if you have any questions, you can write the question in the chat. Ok? Então vou fazer em português.
So now I will have the presentation in Portuguese, and we'll have the simultaneous translation if you'd like to hear. So now, as we talk about the numbers in the third quarter, we had an adjusted EBITDA of 55.6 million and a growth of 10.4% in relation to the third quarter in 2019. And the EBITDA was exactly the same as what was delivered in the second quarter in 2020. We had a net revenue 73.9% in relation to the third quarter of 2019. We had a very strong month, especially for cardboard and also for our paper business, which represented a lot of this incremental revenue compared to the third quarter last year. And we finished the month with a net debt of 1.1 with the resources of the IPO available, and this number is 73.9% smaller than last year. When we consider the PIS/COFINS credit plus the sale of some assets that we performed last year, we have some resources to receive throughout this year and the next year to reduce our net debt, and then it'll drop to 0.42. The investments in this quarter were 17.3 million, and pretty much in line with what we had in the first 2 quarters this year. As important events, For this quarter, we had the follow-on for Irani, the IPO, where we were able to raise 405 million, completely geared to our investment cycle that we are calling the Gaia platform, which includes 5 important projects in the initial phase, plus some other future projects possibly. And this is what we're calling the Gaia platform. Gaia means Earth. And we decided to use this name because most of our investments are focused on environmental benefits. So, Giovanni, do you have any comments to add on in regards to these general numbers? No, Sergio, you can keep on. All right. Great. So when we take a look at revenue for the third quarter, 9.4% above, and lower exports due to strong internal demand, with 15.5% of our revenue in our third quarter compared to 19.1% in the third quarter of last year, and a lot lower when we think about the percentage of exports in the second quarter, which is a quarter where we had a weaker internal market and we exported more. So we had a net profit of 25.5 million, 66.9% higher than in the third quarter of last year. And this month we had a profit of the operation that was quite relevant. And we also had an event which was the PIS/COFINS tax credit from that lawsuit from Irani last year. And now we had a complementary additional amount related to the Roberto shares, the company that we acquired in the end of 2003, that added on complementary credit of 17 million, and net that was about 12 million. Now the EBITDA, as I mentioned, is pretty much in line with the second quarter. That was an additional 10.4% compared to the same quarter last year. So the numbers of the third quarter last year were even smaller. We considered the disclosed numbers, such as we didn't consider Vila Maria in our numbers, but considering the continued operation, we had an increment of 10.4% and an EBITDA margin of 21.3%. Does anyone have any comments to add on? No? You can keep on. Now, when we think about the cardboard business, the containerboard packaging, this is a business that has been very rigorous in the last month. We did not imagine that the second semester was going to be so strong as we are experiencing. And just to give an idea, BPO grew 10.2%. When you think about total volumes, 1 million tons compared to 936,000 last year, and we grew an additional 12.7%, 43,000 tons compared to 38,000 tons that we had in the third quarter last year. So now the comment here is, why is there such a strong dynamic like this? Well, it's because during the pandemic, we saw significant growth of 2 main segments, which was the food segment that's most representative for the market categories, and also hygiene and cleaning products, due to the greatest consumption of these products in houses and homes during the pandemic. This dynamic continues during these months, especially because there's still some significant social isolation while there's not an efficient medication or vaccine available for COVID. So this higher consumption of cleaning supplies and food items has still been quite high, and there is a resuming of the other sectors going back to work, trying to recover their inventories. So they had their inventories reduced due to the interruption of their activities during the pandemic, and then they are trying to replace their inventories, but they've had quite a bit of a difficulty to buy volumes above the historical average, because the main corrugated container board companies have their capacities overburdened, which has really reached to some production records compared to the historical average in the same month. So they're reaching some records when in the month of September and July. So with shipping records, and we're also forecasting a new record for the month of October. So we had an increment in prices, and in 1 year of 4.1% on average, and 4.6 in square meters. And here's an increment in volumes in square meters of 10.3, very similar to 10.2 in tons, and Evidenia is 11.9. A little below 12.7 when you think about tons, 90 million square meters, and the volume of 4.6%. So this this dynamic is continuing, and this has generated a bit of stress in the supply of the corrugated container board market as a whole, but we have fortunately been able to meet the needs of our customers considering their consumption averages and historical supply needs. So our operations have really been meeting the demands of our customers for container board packaging. And does anyone have any additional comment, Lindamar? Well, Sergio, when you talk about a resuming of activities, I wanted to highlight home appliances and electronics, like refrigerators and other items from the second semester on. And I'd also mention e-commerce that has exponential growth in Brazil, and that's really been leveraging exports even in the beef and animal protein sector as well. So we have really worked a lot to implement some price corrections and adjustments, and we are evaluating the possibility of a new additional cost due to the incremental costs, and the adjustments in the packaging business has this mismatch because this with the chips, so and the trimmings, and so on the other side, this movement of an increase in the chips and the trimmings has been favoring us with the margins in the packaging, because a drop in the chips would and a reduction in the packaging prices would happen at a slower speed. So we've been working quite a bit on this when it comes to the operation to have good margins in the packaging business. It's important to also highlight these points that Lindamar is mentioning, because e-commerce has a very important role in an increase in volumes. So basically everything goes into a cardboard or container board packaging, and this is very important for the market. And the dollar at this level has also been contributing with greater exports of products, which makes more boxes leave, and the arrival of less boxes coming in from the imports, which also affects the trimmings market as well. So it's important to mention these 2 points, such as the increase of prices. We've been working on increasing our prices every month. We did this in September, that was captured in the results of this quarter, and then in October as well. And we've also added on additional costs in the month of November, and an increase in the month of December. This is due to the increases in the trimmings, and also taking advantage of this moment in the market where we have a huge demand to replace our margins. And we had some years with a crisis and a recession period of 2015 and 2016, and then we were not able to have the complete margins during the crisis period. So now we're replacing these margins and performing the necessary adjustments so that we can go back to covering the cost of the trimmings, and we should have an increase in our margins in the fourth quarter this year due to the increase in pricing for the corrugated container board packaging business, and that we're going to show, and the other businesses also. So when we think about paper for packaging, we had a small drop in sales compared to the third quarter of last year, so 32,000 tons, going to 31,000 tons, and this is due to a greater transfer of for rigid packaging, because last year we sold 8,700 tons, and this year in this quarter we sold 8,351. We are transferring this due to an increase in volume for corrugated paper packaging, but this is, we had a small increase compared to the third quarter last year. So prices went up 2.7% to the in paper for packaging and bags, and 3.7 for corrugated cardboard. And here you had, especially for the thin segment, this has been recovering in the past month. So this month of October, we actually have a mix that's even better than what we expected for this period. But during the third quarter, we had at least the first and second month with a mix that was worse than what we had forecasted. So that's why this incremental price was lower. But in the next quarter, we will see a price situation that's quite favorable due to the improving of the mix and also an increase of prices that we are implementing in the month of November, especially for thicker paper packaging. And so we were selling an amount that was a lot less expressive for container boards, and we increased our sales. And since the beginning of this year, we have an increase in price of 3.7%, but we are also forecasting for the month of October a significant increase of prices, and also November we have been able to be in line with the trimmings prices, so we should have increasing prices every month. And so it's important to highlight that although the trimmings have been pressuring the margins for the third quarter, they really favor a price resuming and a margin recovery process in this last quarter that will more than compensate the increase of costs in the trimmings, but also recover margins from previous periods due to the recession, where we were not able to have such a favorable market period to replace or reposition our margins historically. So in this market here, Henrique, do you have any comments about this? Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, just to explain a bit about the flexible or paper packaging prices. When you have 2.7%, it seems like a small price increase. But the thin paper packaging has a sales price between 6,500 and 7,200 reais, and corrugated container board packaging has a price that varies between 3,200 and 4,500. So the mix of thinner paper packaging, we were able to sell 21% less in the third quarter compared to 2019, and this recover has already been coming in month by month. So if we were to separate thin and thick packaging, we would notice that thick grew 9% and thin package grew 14%. But when you gather both of them, due to the sale of less thinner packages, you have just 17%. So it's important to also mention the exponential growth for tele-delivery for restaurants like iFood and Rappi and other restaurants. With delivery operations, we were very strong in this segment. We are present in all of the tele-delivery services. We're very active in this market, and our growth has been exponential. And when you consider the price here, we can see a small correction for the next presentation. So in March of 2020, we had a shift in the taxing of ICMS from 17 to 12%. So when we look at that, there's still the price of 17%. Yes, in Santa Catarina, exactly. So when we think about the 2398, the sales they had 12%. So in this interval, I had a calculation here that it would be about an increase of 11% comparing and perform this correction of the increase in prices. In the next presentation, we will correct this. So it would be important for them to work with net prices, but in the corrugated paper packaging, you have the same effect with the corrugated container board and the effect of the ICMS tax. So when you take a look at the scraps, which I believe are very important because there's a significant increase, the association that monitors the scrap prices and paper prices in Brazil had an increase of 17% compared to the third quarter of 2019, and in our case we had an increase that was a little lower of 13.7% because we have a higher volume in Santa Catarina, and here you also have freight costs included due to this. So now about scraps, they're still pressured, and they're still pressured in the month of October. But we were able to look at this with two perspectives. Of course, if you have an increase in scraps, you have a short-term cost pressure that's important, but it also favors the increases of pricing in the packaging, especially in a quarter where there's so much local demand, and the justification for an increase of price due to the increase of scrap expenses was already considered natural, and then the price adjustments take place easier than if there was not an increase in the scrap costs, sustaining the arguments about the increase in costs for packaging. So despite the fact that this increase was significant in the semester, in the quarter, this is continuing in the fourth quarter, but we have been able to have an increase in prices of the packaging, which are very significant, and then more than compensate this increase in the scrap costs, which will even contribute to replacing our margins. Historically, when we think about the Rosin business, this was a month where we had a volume that was a little smaller in sales. We had significant growth in the second quarter, but in an annual perspective, we should actually increase what we had forecasted last year and what we did last year. But in the third quarter, we had a smaller volume of sales of 3,146 compared to 3,401 tons last year. And for example, for the gum rosin, which is the raw material that we use to manufacture rosin, sorry, this is the price of the rosin, 4,323 compared to 3,651, which is very much influenced by the dollar prices throughout this year. And when we think about the turpentine prices, this dropped 32.3% due to that phenomenon of an operation that was interrupted throughout last year, and that recovered at that moment during the operation of the factory of BASF that exploded in Europe, and we had this operation paralyzed for quite a long time. And when this operation was resumed, prices went back to historical levels, which is why we had such a significant drop in prices in reais, although the dollar did compensate part of this price. I think that's pretty much actually. This volume issue is really the ship logistics in the port. Our volume throughout the year will be greater than last year. And the issue of prices is that despite the prices, the main issue here was currency variations, and the raw material, which is the gum rosin, where 85% is bought from third parties, actually dropped. So that contributed to the supply chain results. And the other good news is that we are seeing a perspective of an improvement in prices in dollars for the gum rosin and for the turpentine, which will contribute to helping this business have a better result. So that's basically leveraged by the demand in China. Well, now in this financial aspect, you can see our total net debt was 640 million, and a net debt of 377.4, and a leverage of 1.1, considering the credits that we'll be receiving from the tax credits that are already being compensated, and their receipt from Vila Maria, and part of the amount from the sale of the CNPC forests will be reaching 0.43, where 7% is foreign currency and 93% is national currency, and 84% is long-term debt and 16% are short-term debt. So readjustment after the IPO process, which was very significant, and that really gives us room for the investment cycle that we are beginning. Ojiba, okay, now here it would be important to mention the liability management that we performed with the cash that was captured during the IPO. So we have been liquidating the operations, the funding and loans that are more expensive than the average price to be able to really reduce the debt cost. And we don't have a lot more room to improve this because our main resources are debentures and green bonds, and 505 million, and we don't even have a forecast for this. But the second important point is the work we've already been developing to have funding for investments. So we have been working, our initial plan is to work with BNDES, and we've been really advancing with some different financing lines for this kind of enterprise. So we have long terms and really good rates. And of course, we have a plan B of searching for operations in the market. But of course, plan A is to have financing with the BNDES to be able to re-leverage the company and our financial policy, really to optimize the capital structure, and thus maintain throughout the entire development of the investments a leveraging level that is very low and adequate, and at the same time implement the investments with a very comfortable cash position. So I think this is our main focus in the financial department. Liability management is pretty much finishing, and a full focus on funding in the investment projects. And yeah, so we continue to migrate to Novo Mercado. On the 10th of August, we had the general shareholders meeting that approved the migration to the Novo Mercado, and also the meeting with the preferred shareholders. And now we are at the recession right period that will finish by the 11th November. And our expectation is that with all the documents very well, we've been reviewing all of the documents and the policies with B3, and this is all pretty much adjusted. We're almost finished with this process and should be completing this by the end of this month of November, depending, of course, how things move along and B3's deadlines. But we would like to finish this process with the company listed on the Novo Mercado, which is one of the promises we had during the IPO process in July, where we would really have this entire process under progress. So everything's moving pretty much as we planned. Yes, and the expectations that we'll finish before the deadline for this, which had been originally imagined to be 6 months. So then the Gaia platform, as I mentioned, is we have a landing page and on our website, and the main focus is to organize this in a very transparent manner for the market with all of our projects. So Gaia 1 is our expansion project for the recovery of chemicals and utilities, and expansion of the packaging in Santa Catarina, the reform of Machine 2 for Gaia 3, and the PCH Cristo Rei in São Luís, and Gaia 5 for São Luís. And Gaia 1 and Gaia 2 projects are moving along very well. We're completing the basic engineering aspects of Gaia 1 and already defining the next phases. Gaia 2 is a planning phase that's pretty much advanced. We've been negotiating the equipment, and in the beginning of next year, we should be finishing the construction work. And our main goal is to work in line with the schedules that we presented to the market, and if possible, complete the project. So with the reform of Machine 2, we are anticipating this because of this greater demand of paper for packaging, which is the main paper that's produced in this machine. The impacts of the Gaia platform, supporting this Gaia name, we have an increase of the production capacity of 29% of pulp, and you can see the expansion in Santa Catarina, and with the energy generation, we're going to have an impact of 56% in the increase of generation, 10% with Gaia 4, which is Kisuhei, and 33% with Gaia 5, with PCH São Luís. So here, is there any complimentary comments, Fabiano? Fabiano is responsible for all of the support and monitoring of the project. So if you could go back one slide, I'd like to highlight this brand, which really symbolizes the cycle of nature and the planet, and the unite of the infinite cycle of GNA, which is like a classic concept of the recycling and circular economy representation. So that's a very important and a bit of the spirit of our brand. And the opening of the brand is because there's a connection with the environment. It doesn't close, right? Very good. So the marketing team is really thought of so much with the concept of the brand. And Fabiano is also responsible for our PMO and for monitoring the implementation and deployment of all the projects from the budget and deadline perspectives. So he rigorously monitors all of this. And so when it comes to the presentation, that's pretty much it. Now we'll have time for questions and answers, but just to highlight our IR investor relations team. So Giovanni is responsible for this role inside the company. He's constantly in contact with the market. Evandro, our accounting manager. Marcos is our finance manager. Alex is our accounting and investor relations coordinator. Mariciani, she's normally directly in touch with the market. She's our investor relations analyst. And Emmanuel Devisal, our financial analyst, he's also part of the team here. And he's always available, of course, to our investors. So I think from the perspective of the presentation, that's pretty much it. And now we'll have time for Q&A. Please feel free to share any of your questions, and we'll try to respond them. And now we will be opening up people's microphone. So we can open up your microphone if you would like to share your question here. So I'm going to open up Kai's microphone.
Deve estar aparecendo para ti uma mensagem aí, Caio.
Oi, pessoal, boa tarde. Me ouvem?
Hello, can you guys hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions about this point that you guys mentioned. With the increase in scraps and margins and increasing in prices in the third quarter, you guys have talked about an increase in pricing. Can you guys remember the order of the price increase? I think it was about 8% or something. I don't think we've seen this applied yet in the unit revenue in the third quarter. And what I wanted to understand also, you guys mentioned a lot about, is the increase in the scraps costs also influencing the greater ease to transfer prices. And I wanted to understand two main points. The first point is basically when you guys, how much you guys announced as an increase in price in the third quarter, and how much you're imagining for the fourth quarter, and how much we can imagine as an increase of unit revenue for the next quarter, so we can calculate the impact on margins, and also this resuming of margins now for the fourth quarter. And the other point that I think is also important is the costs of scraps that's already close to 800 reais per ton. Should it continue to impact your margin in the fourth quarter and even in 2021? What do you guys imagine as the scraps market, and how long do you think the prices are going to continue to be higher? Until when do you think these prices are going to be sustainable as well? In regards to the strong demand, the increase in the dollars, I wanted to hear a little bit from you. Well, first of all, your question about prices. We cannot be disclosing the exact price that we're going to be increasing for the fourth quarter, but we have had price increases every month. We had an increase in prices that was partial in the month of September. That was already pretty much captured in the numbers of the third quarter. We had another increase in the month of October. We had another increase of prices in the month of November and in October. That was also very significant. And that's already implemented as well. And we are organizing it in another price increase for December. So these are significant price increases, and they pretty much recover the additional scraps costs because they only represent about 20 to 25% of the total Irani costs, and the price increases are at very significant percentages. And that's why we consider historical margins. So it would be very difficult to find a moment that was so adequate to replace the margins as we've seen now, where the market is very demanded. We have paper scarcity in the market for companies that are not integrated. And since we are integrated, we should not have any issues with paper supplies, but when it comes to the scraps, they're pretty much pressured still. And in our perception, they should continue to be pressured until mid-December. And then we'll start having a recovery of the shipments in the months where we had record shipments. So this return normally takes about 3 months anyway. So we reached records in July, August, and September. So now from November on, we start to have a return in the scraps and volumes that are very significant. And then we are already imagining an increase in a reduction in the increase of the scrap prices by mid-December, beginning of January. So when we think about the history of this, the price of these scraps, they're normally a little more expensive in the second semester, and they have a drop in the beginning of the year. So this is a typical trend for the scraps, but this year is very atypical, and the demand is very strong still, and we forecast that it'll continue to be strong in the first quarter of next year for corrugated container board packaging. And this dynamic is going to continue. E-commerce is very strong because of the pandemic. And this perception of sustainability of the business, of the paper business, as an alternative to other materials is still continuing, and inventory replacement is happening at a slow rhythm because they're not being able to buy. They have a strong demand, but they haven't been able to buy to be able to replace their inventories. So this should continue throughout the next quarter. Any other complementary comments? Just a small correction. It's still our perspective that it should continue to increase by the first quarter next year. I think an important point as well is the dynamic. While we're able to transfer the costs and the prices, the increase of the scraps, this is not a harmful scenario because you can have all of the corrugated container board packaging, and it's natural to see this, but you can also transfer the prices and even expand margins. So it's different than what happened in 2015 or 2016. We had an increase in the scrap costs with a reduction in the demand due to the recession the country was going through. So it was a completely different scenario. And this scenario of the sale of scraps is not necessarily bad. In the current conditions and context with all this huge demand, it allows us to really transfer this cost increase and even expand our margins. I wanted to highlight also and complement your speech, Odivan, that this increase in the prices of the scraps in mid-December does not mean a reduction in price up ahead. So the market still has a big demand, and it should continue to have this demand. So there's no price reduction in the first quarter. When you take a look at the dynamic, the scraps increase and the prices increase generally in the next quarter or the next semester when the demand is pretty good. So 2016 was a perfect storm. We had an increase of scraps and a very weak demand. And then we were not able to transfer the prices in the final consumer. But now that's not the case. You have an increase of costs, but you have a market that has a huge demand, which makes it possible to have this kind of price transferring. And when the scraps start a down cycle, you can probably have a very strong demand, as Lindomar mentioned, and then the price of the packaging doesn't drop as much as the scraps, which makes the margins increase even more. So I think that's pretty much it. When it comes to scraps, I believe this is our perspective. In December, we should have this trend of leveling it out, continuing throughout the first months of the year. Now I will open up Caio Ribeiro's microphone for his question. Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me all right? Yes, we can. Perfect. So, well, my first question here is about this alternative that you have to sell more paper for packaging or corrugated container board, because at this moment we see some international players like International Paper and Smurf and Kappa increasing their kraftliner prices and presenting some signs of an increase of prices up ahead. But the demand for corrugated containerboard is very heated up, and it should continue forward. So I wanted to understand a little better how you would prioritize in the next quarters this choice between these two products, selling more paper for packaging or more cardboard, corrugated cardboard or containerboard boxes, trying to capture these market trends that seem to be favorable for both products. And in second place, in regards to the projects that you'll be organizing throughout the next years, in the beginning, did you imagine having, you imagined some project in Minas Gerais to increase your capacity for, you had kind of given up on this project in Minas Gerais because the returns expected didn't seem very high compared to the other projects you guys have in your portfolio. But with this current moment that we're experiencing with the superheated demand and this space for increasing prices, do you think you could review this project and maybe reconsider it? Because now it seems the market needs more capacity. So these are my two questions. Thank you, Caio. I think the first point is to understand that our flexibility is pretty much limited in regards to selling different types of paper. Nowadays, our best option, Caio, is to transfer as much paper of corrugated and sell the rest to rigid packaging or stiff packaging. So maybe if you have a little bit leftover pulp, you could sell kraftline paper, but generally we sell the recycled paper because we use the cellulose in the paper and the pulp that we have and the machines 1, 2, and 4. Machine 1 is a hybrid machine where we can sell paper for packaging in paper bags and also for corrugated containerboard, and machine 4 is for thin paper. So these papers from machines 1, 2, and 4 that are mostly focused on packages have a lot better margins than selling kraftline or any other products. So for us, it doesn't make sense to shift to other purposes that are not the traditional uses of this kind of paper, because it would not be useful for corrugated containerboard packaging because they're a lot thinner and these machines are specialized in this kind of paper. And machine 5 which has had very good performance. Machine 5 and 7, these are specific paper for corrugated containerboard packaging, and they have been producing as much as possible for our packaging factories that are reaching their full capacity, and the rest we sell to the market that is about 3,000 to 4,000 tons per month. And it's also a product that's pretty much demanded for due to the scarcity of paper in the market. And what's done in paper bags is understanding, and paper for sacks is where we have better profitability, if it's for the exports or internal market, and so that we can have the best profitability. So we work generally with a mix between the local and external market, but there's not much of a modification in the rolls and the papers that we make because of the specialization of each type of machine we use. So when it comes to the projects, I don't know if this point is already answered, but if not, you can get back to us as well. And in regards to the projects, we had in our portfolio, had disclosed this during the IPO roadshow, the Energize project, but it was still kind of like an embryo phase with a very low return. But we are reviewing these projects, and they are part of this investment cycle for an upgrade in the paper machine and also packaging factory. This is in our radar, but we are restudying these projects in regards to their scope and this factory you mentioned about having a packaging factory in a shorter period than we had initially imagined, and this can really contribute to improving the returns. So we had a second factory being built in 4 years that would not have any problems in the market, having to reduce prices to be able to occupy the factory, and this would affect the entire market price to this new capacity. But if you have this kind of dynamic in the market now, then the project can of course be implemented or deployed a lot quicker, and this definitely would help the project return quicker. But yes, this is part of our portfolio of possible projects, but we're only going to approve these projects in our board meeting when we have a return rate that's a little more attractive, especially in regards to other potential projects that we already have in the company. Perfect, thank you. That's very clear, Sergio. Thank you so much. Now we have Pedro.
Pedro
de Matos.
consegue?
Oi, pessoal, tudo bem?
Hello.
Acho que só duas dúvidas
I think two main questions. The first is about the Gaia 1 project with the boiler, and there's a timeline that timing that seems a bit distant, like 3 years. Is this very conservative, or do you have any option of maybe speeding this up a bit? And what are the preps like? So the licenses, environmental licenses and authorizations, what do you guys consider to be the deployment risks when it comes to the construction process? So that's the first question. And the second question is maybe a little more technical, but please help me also to think about how you guys have been handling capital allocations, because in the profit that you guys consider for the calculation basis for dividends, are you guys going to adjust this for the non-recurrent amounts, such as all of the non-current amounts that are going through your P&L that could also maybe be considered for dividends? So these are the two questions I had. Thank you very much. Well, about Gaia 1, we are in the final phase of engineering, and this is progressing quite well. And Henrique Zuckerman is the owner of this project. He's one of the directors, and he's the one that's most connected to that project, Henrique Zuckerman, and maybe he can talk about how the preps are and how the project has been moving along. Yeah, well, we already have the basic engineering work completed. We are already in the period where we're going to be analyzing the technical proposals from different suppliers. We are already starting to perform like the pre-construction sites. So it's pretty much inside the time frame. We're already visiting many different suppliers for possible suppliers for project, and I believe that within 60 days we should be having the full project pretty much set up to begin the technical negotiation with suppliers. And in regards to anticipating the project, I think 3 years is a good time frame. If things keep moving as far as they have been, we'll be able to deliver a little before 3 years. But we are considering this time frame of 3 years, which is the timing that our suppliers believe is necessary to deliver and assemble each of the equipment and all of that. Of course, we will try to reduce the time frame as much as possible. We have a critical process, which is the construction of the actual boiler. The recovery boiler has a deadline of 21 months for the construction. So even if we do try to anticipate everything, we will have to wait for the construction of the boiler, and we will be able to buy this in the beginning of next year, because there's a period to select quotes and the best prices and technical conditions. So yes, in regards to dividends, these are part of the dividends, but please remember that this is forecasting 25% upon the profit of each quarter, of each semester, and up to 50% of the profit. So even if we pay based on this basis, when you adjust this, it could there could be some kind of a correction. Actually, the net profit, we can't exclude the recurrent years. According to the law, you must calculate the dividends according to the calculation basis of the complete profit. So yes, it does include the non-recurrent amounts, which is the calculation basis. I think that's pretty much your question, right, Pedro? But the board has the prerogative of defining up to 50%. That's our policy. But of course, this will always be adjusted annually. Now we do have a question from Vitor. Vitor, do you mind opening up your microphone? Good afternoon. How's it going? Great. First question I had actually already made and was pretty much answered about the scraps, but I just want to understand if we find any kind of problems in the supplier, are we forecasting any kind of difficulties in regards to this in the next month? So we have heard from some partners that it's not so easy to buy scraps from the market. Despite the pricing issue, there's also a challenge to find it. So that's the first point. The second point is understanding a bit about the installed capacity at the moment. Can we consider that the third quarter is like the peak installed capacity currently of the company without thinking about the new projects? Or is there still a little room for growth in some machines? Thank you very much. All right, so about scraps. We've already gone through more critical periods during the pandemic, like in the beginning of the pandemic, where we had the interruption of selective collection and recycling in some cities, and in some moments due to the resuming of shipments that happened in July, August, and September, because of the 3 months time period, we haven't seen a scarcity of scraps in the system, especially for companies that are bigger and that have strong partnerships with scrap companies that also prefer these companies normally in greater difficulty phases. So we've never had problems with the supply of scrap. But of course, when you have a special holiday or a situation where you have a replacement of a smaller inventory replacement, you may have a reduction of the timing of the inventory date for scraps, but it was never a situation where we had to like interrupt some kind of a machine with a more critical situation. So we don't see this scenario for major companies. And the second question was about the installed capacity. And if this third quarter is like the peak limit, Yeah, we have our full capacity for packaging and also paper machines. They have been producing continuously, so they produce with their full capacity. They just have some interruptions for maintenance, but the packaging factories have been, ever since July, working in their full capacity. Now, what we've had some gains is in the amount of days or maybe eventually some production records that we're able to reach. So in October, we reached a production record in all four paper machines and the two packaging factories. So this volume and greater demand also leads to some incremental gains of productivity throughout time. Thank you very much. If you allow me just to add on one point, in the third quarter, in regards to the second, we had an increase of revenue and in sales, and also a reduction in margins, especially the EBITDA margin. I think that part of the reason I understood, but I wanted to know if there's anything else involved as well. So there was the increase in the scraps costs, but there was also a shift in the product mix, especially in regards to the thickness of the papers. Is that it? Or is there some other points we should consider in our analysis? Of course, we have an improvement in the product mix compared to the second quarter. It was the most difficult quarter. We had to export more paper. We had to sell more paper with lower added value due to the drop in consumption locally. And in the third quarter, we've already seen an improvement in the mix and a recovery, practically 100% recovery from September, October, November. So in this fourth quarter, we have a mix that's pretty much optimized and a little better than what we had imagined in our budget. So I don't imagine this factor yet. I assume this factor as something positive instead of negative. And the scraps, of course, had an important impact in our costs. This represented this drop in margins. But there's a mismatch as presented by Lindomar from the moment when the scraps go up and the final pricing transfer. So the second, typically we have one price increase per year only in the beginning of the semester and the next year. But this year, due to the increase of demand and the pandemic and the scrap costs that wasn't expected at such a high speed, we are increasing a lot more. So we had an increase in the month of October, September, October, November, and probably in December as well. So we've also been pretty much replacing the margins from the second semester. So the main margin drop factor was the increase of the scraps. Thank you very much. We have two questions still, and then we can end because we're reaching close to the final schedule. So Lau Correa, please. Hello. Hi, Sergio. Hi, Odivan, everyone else. Can you guys hear me? Yes, right. So everyone's asking if they're hearing, but I think you guys are hearing well, right? But I think, well, I know we're already finishing up our schedule. So these are more just occasional issues. Whatever you guys can talk about is fine. Just so we can give a bit of context. So you can say that the increase in price for the fourth quarter double digits. Or the second point is, I think what you already mentioned about the project, but I wanted to understand a bit more about the milestones that we can imagine in the next month. Is there something concrete as an important event that we should monitor? Be a little more smarter about in regards to this project. And finally, a question that always comes up is, since you guys have a lot to implement and a lot of growth, just to confirm if any of the projects will cannibalize the generation of cash in the company or compromise some critical pathway in the current asset basis that you have. So I just wanted to confirm these 3 points quickly. So thank you very much. So about the projects, very quickly, we will try to make this as transparent as possible in the portal with the deadlines as well as the budget issues for each of them so that the investors can monitor this continuously.
A gente não vê nenhuma
We don't imagine any kind of competition as a normal activity for the company projects. We have specific teams dedicated to the project, and we have an area that's specifically dedicated to strategic projects. So the project management and implementation of the project is done with exclusive teams that are completely dedicated to the project so that they don't have to compete with the day-to-day activities in the company. So we really take a lot of, we're very careful about this so that we have no losses in regards to how each project is conducted. And a bit of an anticipation for machine 2 that was forecasted to start its operation in 2022, that we're starting in 2021 with the engineering work and the completion of the renovation work in the first semester of 2022. So and the milestones you mentioned, and the boiler, I think there's the acquisition of the equipment that should happen in the beginning of next year. And for the packaging, we're already in the phase for the acquisition of the equipment. This will already appear in our schedule as soon as we finish. We're negotiating the main equipment, and then in machine 2, we have the 3 projects we're beginning now because the PCH really depend on the licensing. And that's something that's also been progressing. And machine 2 will have the engineering work with machine throughout the first semester of next year. And the acquisition of the equipment during the second semester, during the equipment delivery time, should be about mid first semester of 2022. Did I say anything stupid? No, that's it. That's what we're trying to work on. We're trying to anticipate machine 2, but that's pretty much our schedule. All right, and what was the first question? Sorry. The increase of prices, could you imagine them being double digits? Yeah, we're completely secure, differently than other moments. The increases of September, October, and November are already implemented. And we've announced another increase for December, and we're defining a percentage we're going to work on with boxes, but the increase is significant, and we have most of them implemented already in October and November. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we have one last question from Leonardo Fantin. By what I understood, he doesn't have a microphone. So I will read his question. What's the schedule for the interruption of the machines for maintenance with their full capacity operation? And what's the timing on average? And what's the impact of the currency exchange in the processes of the project? Well, in regards to machine interruptions for maintenance, the only machine we're going to have to interrupt is going to be machine 2. And that's already in the calculation for the tier of the project. So with this downtime and working capital associated, this is already forecasted for the returns on the project and also from the perspectives of the production. So we've actually been anticipating productions to be able to meet the needs of our customers during the downtime. And we estimated a downtime of 3 weeks. Yeah, 3 weeks. But I think Leonardo's question is more in regards to other paper factories that have like an annual downtime for maintenance. And in our case, we don't perform like an annual maintenance downtime. We have many short downtimes during the year. So basically, all of the machines stop a few hours during the month for preventive maintenance, but we don't have this kind of long general downtime as some other paper factories do. We have some specific big equipment, but we don't do like a general downtime or interruption of the whole plant. And for machine 2, our estimate is that we'll be stopping for 3 weeks. Now in the recovery boiler, there could be some general downtime in the whole factory for the interconnection, but this will be very few days, and that will be planned accordingly. What was the other part? Also the impact of the currency exchange and the currency variations, which impact packaging. When we presented the project to the market, we had considered the dollar at 5 reais, and that's a little higher now. So the equipment that are calculated in dollars, are going to have a bit of an impact because of the currency exchange. But in regards to the boiler, we don't have that many equipment. Most of them are manufactured in Brazil, but there is a bit of pressure, of course, due to the increase of steel and some other inputs and materials that have increased importantly, but we don't foresee a substantial increase in regards to the capex that was announced during the roadshow period. I think that's pretty much it. We don't have any other questions and we can finish for now. So thank you everyone for your participation and the possibility of presenting our earnings. So we'll be available with all of the IR team to answer any future questions that you may have. Thank you very much. See you later. Thank you everyone. Goodbye. Thank you everyone.